In this video, we're going to be talking about what not to do when living as an expat in Mexico, which has been one of the most requested topics from you guys in the comments.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. This is Justin. I'm Amanda, and on this channel, we talk about all things being an entrepreneur living overseas. And speaking of living in Mexico, we have a very cool free guide for you guys down below in the description, which is our free Moving to Mexico guide. Many of you have expressed interest that you're interested in starting off your digital nomad and entrepreneur expat journey in Mexico. So we put a guide together for you to help you get started, and you can find it below.
The first thing you want to make sure that you never do when you come and live in Mexico as an expat, or any country for that matter that is not an English speaking country, is to expect everybody around you to speak English. People in Mexico speak Spanish for the most part. Is there a relatively large population that does speak English, especially that are closer to our age, and especially in big cities and in tourist areas and things like that? Yes, absolutely. But you never want to go to another country that does not speak your language and expect them to speak your language, or speak to them in English and expect them to know what the hell you're talking about. Because it may work in Cancun or Playa del Carmen or some border towns, but the language of Mexico is Spanish. And so you want to do your very best to at least learn a little bit of Spanish before you come, or at the very least, make an effort, make an attempt to read the menu, to ask for things in Spanish, even if you do have to use a Google Translator, because the locals do appreciate you making an effort a lot. And if you're really trying to not just be a tourist, but actually become an expat, you want to assimilate into the local culture and educate yourself about the language, the culture, the traditions, and everything else. It's not just about coming and bringing everything that you know from America, like your English language, and applying that here as if you're just in another city in your home country.
What tips do you have for people who are trying to learn not English? What tips do you have for people who are trying to learn Spanish for the first time? Because Spanish was actually my first language. I've been speaking it my entire life. So I've never had to go through the process of learning Spanish. I have taught Spanish. But you had to, I mean, you moved to Colombia and you didn't know a lick of Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So what tips do you have for people who are in the same position you were in, where you don't know anything? And let's be real, second language classes in the United States, in high school and stuff like that, are not great. You could take 6 years of Spanish and still not know Spanish. So what are your tips for people in that situation?
Absolutely. And yeah, unlike Amanda, I had to learn Spanish basically on my own. My parents did not speak Spanish. A lot of people think that maybe I'm Latino or something else. I'm going to be American Mexican soon in a few years when we get our passport. But I did not grow up learning Spanish. I actually grew up learning English and Russian, and learned Spanish later on in life, mainly when I visited and lived in Colombia, because that was the first time I lived somewhere else outside of the US that wasn't a border town, for example, in Mexico, where very few people relatively understood English. So I had to force myself to learn the language. And the number one thing for sure in terms of learning Spanish for me was really just the immersion. So it was like finding all those words that kept getting asked or repeated or whatever in a conversation, the ones that I would constantly be looking up on Google Translate. So I would have the Google Translate app. If you're traveling around a lot, it helps to actually download all of the translations onto your phone. You can do that in the app itself. And there's other translation apps, but Google Translate for me has worked the best out of all of them. And you can download the things for offline use and travel, and just use Google Translate. You can even talk into it, and it'll talk out in the language that you want to speak. But really start making a note of all the words that you're using the most frequently, and then start to study those words and build your vocabulary. Another one that works pretty well is Duolingo, and that's free. For the most part, it's all free. You can have, there's some premium features, or if you want to eliminate ads, you can subscribe to it. But Duolingo is a really good app, at least for the basics and for getting the vocabulary. If you want a little bit more advanced sentence structure and things like that, I've used Rosetta Stone in the past as well for reviewing my Russian and also for learning a little bit of Spanish and for dabbling in some other languages. So that's a good one. We'll have to get one of those guys to sponsor our videos. But yeah, apps like that are pretty solid. And I also took in-person Spanish classes when I was living in Medellin. I had a teacher that came over and she would have like a whole lesson plan and we would do vocabulary and practicing and things like that. You always want to practice with native speakers. The other thing that I recommend on that note is going to language meetups. So any major city anywhere in the world is going to have some kind of like language exchange type of meetup. And so you go to those things and you can have conversations with people. Usually they'll have like half of it in English and half of it in Spanish. And I've heard that those were really useful for some people. I think I may have been to one or two before, way, way, way in the past, but I've heard really good things about those sorts of events.
Yeah, when I taught English and also Spanish as a second language. It was actually my first job out of college. And although I had a lot more students trying to learn English, I did have a few trying to learn Spanish. And I will say that Spanish can get a little confusing because English tends to be a very efficient language.
Spanish has 6 words
For
for
like the
any
same
given
thing
concept.
plus
Yeah.
yeah 6 words for like the same thing or just all the different tenses and things like that. It's because it's a romantic language, plus there's the masculine and the feminine, which doesn't exist in English. So what I would say is you have to, it's like the same way that you would be teaching a child how to talk. If you can look at, that's how we used to teach people when I was a teacher for as Spanish for a second language. It would literally be like, um, you know, taza, or teléfono or micrófono, and it would be like show and tell kind of a thing, and then actually speaking to them in that language. So if you could put yourself in a situation where you're learning the same way that a kid would be learning, and there's lots of language schools that's the methodology that they use because that's the one that actually sticks when it comes
Yep.
to learning a language conversationally. I think a lot of a problem that Americans run into when learning a second language in school is that you're being taught a lot of grammar typically and a lot of tables, but you're not necessarily being taught how to conversationally speak. And another issue that sometimes Americans have is that they're not being taught by native speakers. So in Mexico, that's actually very different in the education system. They start learning English from a very, well, I don't know about every school, but from what we've been told, they start learning English at a very young age, like 5, basically. And they have classes every day, and they're taught by native English speakers, which is why you will meet a lot of Mexicans who really defend themselves very well in English, but unfortunately, if you are American, the reverse does not tend to happen.
Yeah,
And
the education system in the U.S. kind of sucks.
yeah, it goes down to the way they teach language. It's also not required in the United States to learn a second language, whereas in Latin America, sometimes it is in order to graduate. In Europe, it definitely is. So just if you were, the way that you want to look at it is try and teach yourself or put yourself in a position where you're kind of like a kid, really immersing yourself and being put in a position where you're learning the same way that a child would be learning, which would not be a bunch of grammar and tables and things. It would be, this is called this, this is how you say this, and actually having conversations.
Definitely.
Okay, so the next thing that you don't want to do as an expat is overstay your visa. You want to check the number of days they give you on a tourist visa. We know that most people come to Mexico and they give 180 days. It's true, most people get the 6 months. However, and this is a very big however, that has been changing in recent years. Sometimes they get more strict, sometimes they get more lax, and sometimes it really just depends on who you have either at the border or whoever the customs or immigration agent is at the airport. So maybe they'll be like, oh man, I see you've been coming out of Mexico in and out like 6 times and staying 6 months each time. What's up, bro? Like, and then they'll give you like 30 days.
Yes, you want to be careful. And you also, on that note, you want to be careful about just staying for 6 months and planning on coming back and staying for another 6 months very, very, very sequentially. because they have caught on to that. If you're planning on actually living in Mexico, you want to look at the routes to properly get residence here. In theory, you can just go out and come back after a couple days and then stay in Mexico and then go out for a day and then come back. But not only is that a pain in the ass to do every 6 months if you're planning on living here, but it also can get you caught up with issues with immigration. And they may not even tell you that they gave you less than the full 180 days on your tourist card or on your passport stamp, is how they do it now. So if you overstay your visa, you can run into very severe problems, including ending up at an immigration detention center, which from the reviews we've gotten about those, they are not very fun. This is no Club Med. You don't want to end up there.
Yeah, and a lot of people think Mexico is more lax. Mexico, there were just reports where Mexico was deporting Americans who had overstayed their tourist visa recently. So the Mexican government is starting to crack down a bit more on all of that. So just make sure you know the dates on your tourist visa. We know there's also advice out here that's been going around YouTube where it's in the books in Mexican law where you can get your residency from within Mexico. However, in order to do that, you would have to let your tourist visa expire.
They have a regularization program, and this is not legal or immigration advice. Make sure you consult a qualified attorney in Mexico with a license for any type of decisions that you make regarding this. This is just our opinion, forewarning. But we have heard about what Amanda mentions, which is the naturalization program or regularization program, where basically if you have been in Mexico a certain amount in the last few years, especially around the time of the pandemic, and you currently have an expired tourist visa, there are ways that you can get it regularized within Mexico. It's a little bit more tricky sometimes than going to the consulates, but you want to make sure that that option is available in your city because it's not available in all cities, and you want to consult a qualified immigration attorney here in the country.
Not all attorneys will do it, so there's that. Not all cities will do it because technically you do need to you need to let the tourist visa expire, ergo you would be in the country illegally.
Exactly, so something to think about. Now, on the note of actually coming into Mexico, one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, how do I bring my car to Mexico? If you're looking at visiting or moving to one of the free zones in terms of vehicle importation in Mexico, then you don't normally have an issue. You can pretty much bring your car without any major paperwork or anything like that. Those free zones are the Baja California Peninsula, they are Sonora, and they are most of the areas about 25 kilometers from the border. Sometimes this does change, so you want to look at the most up-to-date information on that free zone. But if you're going, for example, to Puerto Peñasco, which I know a lot of people from Arizona go to because it's not that far from the border that Arizona has with Mexico, you can go there, no issues with your car. Even to those areas, you want to make sure, and this is kind of a bonus one, you want to make sure that you have Mexican auto insurance. Your U.S. insurance will not cover you in Mexico. And here they have a completely different legal system. So if you get caught up in an accident, whether you're at fault or not, and somebody gets seriously injured or killed or anything like that, what happens is you're going to end up in jail until they can figure out, or you're both going to end up there until they can figure out who did it and what's going on.
They have a Napoleonic system.
Yeah,
right? Which is very different.
Not the standard like Roman system that our legal system is based on in the U.S. So that's something to be aware of. You want to make sure you have insurance. So most of the areas like along the border, Baja Peninsula, that sort of thing, you're good without getting an import permit. You definitely still need insurance, but you can not have to get an import permit in those areas if you're going to stay in those areas. Now, if you're going to be driving farther than about 25 kilometers south of the border, or if you're going into mainland Mexico, if you're going to visit Mexico City, if you're going to visit Guadalajara, if you're going to drive down to Tulum or Playa del Carmen or somewhere like that, then you need to get what's called a TIP, or temporary import permit, for your car. And if you don't have one of those import permits, the police can seize your vehicle. They can do a lot of things. It's not pretty. You want to make sure you have one of those. And if you end up getting stopped without one of those things, then you're most likely going to have to pay a very large sum, either for the ticket or to get your car back, which can be, in many cases, larger than the initial value of the car itself. It's a really serious business, so you want to make sure you get that import permit. Usually, the way you do it is they'll charge you a small fee. It's about $50 for the permit itself, and then you'll give them a deposit, which in my case was about $300, which you do get back once you bring the car out of Mexico. So right before you're going to cross the border into the U.S., you stop at the same place that you got that permit, which typically is the Banjercito, which is like their military bank, like the government-run bank, and you'll be able to get that deposit back. But you have to stop by that location at the border before you go too far south of that border. So if you're visiting Tijuana, you can go to Tijuana, you can go to Rosarito, you can go to Ensenada. I think Ensenada is about as far as you can go before you need the permit. So you want to make sure you be very, very careful not to drive farther south than that without that temporary import permit.
This is along the same vein of the cars, but it's very specific to Mexico City because a lot of people do not know this about Mexico City. Do not bring your car into Mexico City without registering it, and do not, when you register it, you're going to be told when you are allowed to bring your car into Mexico City and when you are allowed to drive your car.
They have restrictions
in
based
Mexico
on
City.
the license plates. So
Yeah.
because of the smog and traffic and everything else, they restrict the hours that certain cars can actually be on the roads.
And if you get caught outside of those hours, or if you get caught not having registered the car, they can take it and impound it. Mm-hmm. So you can avoid all of this by just not taking your car to Mexico City. But we understand that some people want to live in Mexico City and want to have their car. So just be aware. Do not drive your car around Mexico City without having the proper registration, and do not drive it outside of the hours that you have been assigned. Yep. To you. All right, speaking of the Napoleonic law system in Mexico, please don't get involved in things you shouldn't be getting involved in. Now, this may sound like common sense. However, lots of people in Mexico like to partake in the more, or I should say, lots of expats, unfortunately, and this is stuff that we see in comments and things like that, like to partake in the
extracurricular activities.
Extracurricular illicit side of the informal economy. Let's put it that way.
What Amanda's trying to say is don't get caught doing off a stripper's at 3 o'clock in the morning in Zona Norte because you can get in trouble. That's what she's trying to say.
And the reason why we bring this up is because unfortunately, and this happens in Colombia too, unfortunately, sometimes you have American expats who think they can do whatever the hell they want and participate in a bunch of illegal activity, and that they're not going to get caught because these places are lawless and they're on conquest, or God knows what they're thinking in their minds.
Passport bros.
Passport bros. Those are usually the ones who end up getting themselves into some sort of trouble. Mexico is not a country where you want, well, any country really, but particularly Mexico is not a country where you want to be finding yourself in situations that you should not be in.
Whether that's getting, and they say, well, Mexico is really safe in a lot of ways compared, many cities in Mexico are safer overall than the average city in the U.S. or many cities in the U.S. Most of the crime that happens here is specifically targeted towards different groups of people. And if you're getting involved in drugs or prostitution or other things, especially that involve groups of organized crime or trying to take business from them or anything like that, you want to avoid that at all costs. It's no bueno. You do not want to get in trouble with any type of criminal gangs here, and you also definitely don't want to get in trouble with the law, because here in the jails, you need to have somebody bring you food. It's not a great picture. Just be safe and don't get involved with things you shouldn't be involved in.
And again, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's common sense. I would never do that. But you would be surprised at the amount of expats that go to other countries specifically to partake in these kinds of activities. So that is why we are bringing that up.
So last on our list, but definitely not least, is you want to avoid bringing all of your standards and expectations and beliefs and cultural norms and everything else from home, whether that's the US, whether that's Canada, whether that's Europe, wherever you're from. You want to avoid bringing those things to Mexico and expecting everything here to run just like it does in your home country.
Because it sure as shit does not.
It does not. And here in Mexico, I mean, in the U.S., we call that being a Karen, right? Don't do that.
Don't be a Karen.
Yeah.
Don't be a Karen in Mexico. Please don't do it. But basically what happens sometimes with Americans, and we recently published a video where we said that one of the things that we like about Mexico is that the fact that you have more personal freedoms in Mexico than you do in the United States. The problem is that there's pros and cons to that, right? So the pro is people leave you the hell alone, and it's very live and let live, and it's a society with a lot of personal responsibility. The con is that there's less regulation for things. For example, there's no such thing as a uniform sidewalk, for example.
And what people do is they'll complain and say, why is that pothole in the middle of the sidewalk open like that? Like, I almost fell and broke my head. I could have sued somebody. First of all, no, you couldn't have. We don't have that kind of litigious society here, and you would not have gotten anything. In fact, you would have gotten some really nasty looks from the judge. Because, like, what the hell are you doing? That's not a thing here. You need to watch where you're going and make sure you don't fall in the hole.
Basically, it's how it goes.
Yeah,
here.
literally and metaphorically, right? You're more out for your own individual safety and happiness and fulfillment and everything else here. The collective or the regulations or the building codes are not necessarily going to keep you safe. You need to be looking out for your own safety. It's not like everything here is a screaming metal death trap, but you want to leave your standards of what you think sidewalks and roads and people on the road driving and whatever else should be from your own country back in your own country. Don't bring that here and expect everything here to be like it was back home.
Or even for certain things to be very convenient and simple. There are some things that are more convenient and simple in Mexico in comparison to the United States and Canada. Apparently, Mexicans opening up a business is one of them. However, there are other things that are not so simple and convenient, like when you try to get a package mailed from the US.
Yeah. So I had a Kindle that was shipped to me from her parents in Miami because I'd ordered it on Amazon. They didn't have it on Amazon here. Or it was double the price or something. So I ordered it there, and I figured, oh, easy. We can just ship it through the USPS, and that was the only way to ship something with the battery. So we sent it through Priority Mail International. It actually didn't take that long to get here, maybe like a couple weeks. But here, for example, mail itself does not really get delivered very often or on time. And they might even say they made an attempt to deliver it to your house, but usually they don't. You have to find the nearest post office near to your house and go and hassle them, and then somebody's going to go and shuffle through a stack of papers and look for your tracking number and then open a cabinet. I'm not even joking. This is actually what happened. And then open a cabinet and ask you what size the box should be because they have them organized in the post office by size. And then they'll bring it out and they'll say, oh, Mr. Justin, so it looks like you have 850 pesos of unpaid tax on this package. I'm like, what? I declared it way lower than what the limit was for having to pay tax. But they reassessed it and they said, no, we're gonna assess the value of this Kindle at $250, and therefore you owe, I think it was like $50 US of tax. So I'm like, I was annoyed, but I'm like, okay, whatever, I get it. I save a lot of money on rent, so I might have to pay more money occasionally when I'm importing things. Not a huge deal. Okay, here's my credit card. Pay the tax. Nope, definitely cannot do that. The government will definitely not take credit cards, except in the immigration office. There they do now. I said, okay, well, do I need to get cash to pay this? How do I do it? No lo puedes pagar aquí. You can't pay that here. You need to take this note, and then you need to go to the bank before they close, because it was Saturday, and they were going to close it they closed at like 2 p.m. on Saturday. It was 1:15. You need to go all the way to the bank. You can go to this bank or this bank. So I went to one bank, which was the Santander, which was the closest bank that there was. I was able to drive there within a few minutes. Went to that bank, stood in line for about 15 minutes, or waited at the lobby for 15 minutes, took the thing. oh yeah, no problem, scan it. And they wouldn't give me a copy of the paper thing, and I needed the paper thing there. So I had to like zoom in on my phone and give them the number so they could scan the thing. It was a whole ordeal. Then finally, after about 30 minutes in that bank, they said, no, at Santander, we can't pay this because the code starts with a 6 and it's a tax. So you have to go to another bank. So I had to research on my phone. Again, I've got 20 minutes left now before all the banks are going to close. So I was there in my car researching on my phone saying, okay, where can I pay this? I guess I can pay it at Bancomer, which is where I bank anyway. So I lug across town about another 10 minutes, drive into a shopping center, into a mall parking lot, get a ticket, park next to the bank, walk over to the bank. I say, hey, I need to pay this. Ah, no, señor, es sábado. It's Saturday. You can't pay taxes here on Saturday. You need to come back on Monday.
So stuff like that happens.
So then I had to go and pay the parking and then go out and then go back home and then wait 2 days and then go back to another bank or to another bank of that branch. And then I waited in line for 45 minutes. And I had to actually take cash out of the ATM. So I had to go there, wait in line. Then they said, you need cash. I had to go take my bank card with the same bank, go to their ATM, bring cash out, pay the thing. And finally, after about 4.5 hours of total time, and then go all the way back to the post office with the letter from the bank saying that I had paid the tax, the $50 tax. This isn't thousands of dollars. It was $50. Take the receipt back to the Mexican post office, Correos de Mexico, bless their heart. And then finally, like 5 days and 6 hours of time later, they finally gave me my Kindle.
Okay, so all of that to say, and this brings up a really great point. Actually, if you have multiple errands to run in a day, don't expect to get the multiple errands done in that day. For example, we have like a digital wallet and stuff, but we still have to go open an actual bank account in Mexico for me. And we've been avoiding it because we know we're going to have to like block out like 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, on a weekday.
On a weekday, just to be able to go get that done. Or, for example, when we went to Telcel to get me
a SIM card.
Yeah,
it took us
that's
almost
a good
6 hours
story.
to get her a cell phone plan.
That's a really good story. Because
They needed like credit and blood type and 3 references and bank statements, like for a $20 a month cell phone plan.
Or
that
also,
kind of thing.
the other thing that happened is we couldn't. So he had an old Mexican phone number that he wanted to port to me, and then we were not able to port it because apparently the number was from Tijuana, and that was the only area in the entire country that they could not port numbers from.
No, they couldn't port it from any area that was outside of this one.
Oh, really? I thought it was just Tijuana.
No. I would have had to, whether it was from there or from any other state, I would have had to go back to TJ or back to whatever state it was.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh, aren't you going to like go back to Tijuana?" And then
and I'm like,
you could
no.
go to the Telcel in Tijuana and just
That's
get
a
it
great
ported.
trip. Yeah, that's a great.
We're like, what?
Well, no, and then I would have had to go back there anytime I wanted to make any sort of change to the plan because only the local store there could have administered the plan because of the area code.
So all of that to say, those are examples that we gave that in the United States or Canada, for example, if you want to get a new cell phone, you walk in and out. You could have showed up yesterday and have no credit, and they will somehow magically find you some credit to give you a phone. But it doesn't work like that.
They'll get the cleaning lady or the
That's the joke.
The secretary. Yeah, that's what our friend George Harris says. The
He's a
Venezuelan
comedian.
He
Yeah.
says, yeah, they'll find someone at the car dealership. They'll get the secretary or the
United
cleaning
States.
lady. Yeah, in the U.S.
United States, they'll find like the cleaning lady to co-sign.
The delivery driver or somebody to co-sign, and you'll get a loan. You'll walk out with your car, no income, nothing.
So
It doesn't work like that here.
In Mexico, those things are different. It's actually very difficult to get credit as a Mexican and even harder as a foreigner. So we're laughing because at this point, it's really funny and we've learned to roll with the punches, which is what full-time travel and living abroad in other countries is going to teach you how to do. It's going to teach you to roll with the punches. That being said, some people, Americans in particular, cannot handle that. or they don't like that. So just know that you might have certain
I
expectations.
was like that in the beginning.
Oh, were you?
I was horrible. I was like, what do you mean I need a reference and I need to go to this other place and come?
You were being a Karen?
I definitely was. At least the first year of being here. I was like, why doesn't everything work like I want it to?
So just keep in mind, right, that you may have certain expectations for efficiency and with how quickly certain things get done in the United States or Canada, and it does not happen as efficiently or quickly here. However, one thing that does get done efficiently and quickly here that does not get done efficiently and quickly in the US and Canada is healthcare. So, there's pros and cons to all of this, and you just have to decide. I'm like, am I going to take efficiency in healthcare versus not having efficiency at the bank and then get mad because the bank takes me 3 hours and go back to the US where I will
Some people do. Some people can't stand all the little things. And if you're someone who, frankly, is like, I don't think that I could live in a society where it takes me 3 hours to get a cell phone plan. Like, maybe Mexico isn't for you, and that's totally fine, right?
So anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed this video of what not to do as an expat. We hope it gave you a lot of giggles, but we're also being dead serious. I know it doesn't look like it because we're laughing so hard right now, but we are being dead serious in this list because these are things that if you are not aware of, can either piss someone else off, get you into trouble, or create a lot of frustration in your life.
Thanks so much for watching and for being part of this entrepreneur expat journey. Make sure you like and subscribe and check out our Living in Mexico and Moving to Mexico guide down below. See you guys on the next one.